Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. Let's go ahead and start off today with some soft news because if we go into for one, because those of you joining in on YouTube, welcome. You know, I am risking it live streaming again on YouTube when I think that was part of the censorship slaughterhouse that happened. But I think now I know why a lot of those channels were demonetized from the censorship. Why they were censored or demonetized was because of certain topics they were talking about. So what I'm going to do is at the end of the show, I am going to tell you all on YouTube that are watching to move over to either Rockfin or Vimeo, which the links are down below, in order for you to get the rest of the show. The good stuff happens when we go underground. So that is what is going to happen. But for the time being, welcome. Thank you for being here. And let's go ahead and just start off with the 5 takeaways from day 3 of Donald Trump's impeachment trial. So let's see if we can get rid of this advertisement. I get these ads on, you know, why do they make it take up half the screen? It's ridiculous. All right. This is a CNN article, and I wanted us to just kind of go through this because this, I thought, had some interesting points about the impeachment. So I guess the Democrats have now, I think this is the end for them. They're no longer making any more cases. I don't know what's going on with the rest of the, I guess tomorrow being Friday, the Trump's team is going to say something, and it's probably not going to be anything really all that important, you know, because they're not making very good cases on anything. And then they'll vote, and that'll be that. And we know he's going to be acquitted. But this article in particular, I would like to go through with you guys. So it says right here, the 5 takeaways for the impeachment, the final impeachment. It says the rioters' statements are damning. So the clear focus of the impeachment managers on Thursday was to provide a clear link between Trump's words and the actions of the violent mob that stormed the Capitol. And time again, the best proof of that link was the rioters themselves. In interviews, in videos, in arrest records, the same theme just kept emerging. They believed they were acting on the wishes and orders. This is important. And the orders of the President of the United States. The lingering image and sound, for me, this is the authors talking, for me, from Thursday's proceedings, was a protester outside the Capitol shouting, "We were invited by the President of the United States," over and over and into a bullhorn. They came here because the president instructed them to do so, said Rep. Diana DeGette from Colorado. It was hard to argue that point after listening to rioter after rioter say just that. Okay. So let's just break that point down for a minute. So there's a lot of these people that have been arrested. They've been blaming Donald Trump, saying, well, you know, the devil made me do it, is what they're saying. Of course, the lawyers are telling them to say this because that's their only defense at this point. The only defense that these rioters have when they're arrested and they're facing jail time is for the lawyer to say, well, crap, you know, we've got you on camera there. That's how they knew it was you. So we know you were there. So we can't deny that. You were caught on camera saying X, Y, Z. So the only thing they can do is basically plead insanity in a way, right? So they can't really say, well, the person was insane, because then maybe they'd have to go to an insane asylum. So instead they say, well, the devil made me do it. It wasn't my own choice. The President of the United States told me to do this. And so I did because the President of the United States did. Every lawyer is going to use that defense. It doesn't mean that their client actually believes that. It's just that that's the only defense they actually have that might work. Otherwise, they have no defense. So yes, we're seeing every attorney under the sun telling their clients, we're just going to have to plead the devil made you do it. And and then hope that the court takes mercy on you. And that's what they're all going to attempt in their defense. It's not going to work. It does mean that they're still going to get convicted. It's not an actual defense. The devil made me do it is not a real defense, but at least it might give them some sympathy to where they don't throw the book at these people. And that's what these attorneys are hoping for. They know their clients aren't going to get away with it. They're just hoping that they can soften the conviction or soften the sentencing. So, yeah, all these people are going to say, the devil made me do it. And we were invited, you know, when they're there, we were invited, we can be here. And, you know, so that still doesn't connect that Trump then somehow incited this violence, that he is the one who plotted and planned and directed the violence. Did he plot, plan, and direct a protest? Yes. But that is protected in our Constitution. And you absolutely can do that, and you should want to continue people doing that. There are things that you're going to want protested, and what you don't want in our society is for people to say you can't do that because you're too powerful. You're a celebrity, so you're not allowed to advocate for a protest because if something happens, it's on you. You incited violence. You're a politician. You can't tell people to go out there and protest because if something happens, it's on you because you organized the protest. That is not the America we want to live in, right? Says right here, number 2, Trump as a future threat. Says one of the most consistent arguments you hear from Republican senators opposed to the impeachment trial amounts to this. What's the point of removing Trump from office? He's already been removed from office by the voters. The point, as House impeachment managers Jamie Raskin and Ted Lieu's my rep, and I vote against him every time, argued Thursday because he's just a waste. He doesn't do anything but Trump. And it's like, we've got homeless people camping outside and Ted Lieu is obsessed with Donald Trump. Yeah. So Ted Lieu argued Thursday, he says that if Trump is not convicted and banned from seeking future federal office, a vote that would take only a simple majority of senators once he's convicted, if he were to be convicted, there's absolutely no reason to think that what happened in January couldn't be repeated. So Ted Lieu says he's not afraid because the people say, what are you afraid of, right? If you really think Donald Trump is abhorrent and that the American people can't stand him, then you shouldn't worry about him running for office again, right? Because when he'd lose. That would be the point, right? The American people would hand him his ass and say, get out of here, you know? Oh, no. But Ted Lieu says, no. It's not that I'm afraid he's going to win. I'm afraid he's going to lose. And if he loses, I'm afraid he's going to do this again. So that's what Ted Lieu is saying. He's not afraid. He says, no. It's silly for you guys to think that that we're afraid of him winning. We're afraid of him losing because then he'll do this again. Look, he'll do what again? He'll say, hey, this was a sham. You guys are corrupt. You guys are crooked. Look, many of us call our politicians crooked and corrupt all the time. So if something happens to one of those politicians, are you and I now liable because we were saying the government's on the take? When we say Nancy Pelosi's on the take and she's bought off by big money interests and she never works for the American people, she only cares about her donors and those are the only people she's working for. You and I know that's true, but because we say that and we say she's crooked and we say she must be removed from office. So let's say we say that all over and over, and we do, right? We say she must be removed from office. So then somebody takes some initiative and they try to forcefully and physically remove Nancy Pelosi from office. Are you and I now responsible because we were claiming, and then she says, this is fake news. This is not, this is just QAnon and white supremacy. People saying that I am bought off and crooked and rich. And, you know, so they could claim, well, that's all conspiracy theory. That's QAnon and that's white supremacy or whatever they want to label it on. You know, that's domestic terrorism, whatever. And then she could say, and so now you've incited violence against me because you spread these conspiracy theories that I am bought off and I only work for my donors. That's silly. I work for the American people. I feed them. And so now you and I are now responsible, or maybe me, you know, because here I am with the microphone. I'm now responsible for something that happens to her because I've been claiming she's corrupt and crooked and bought off. And that we should be removing her from office, that we need to get her out of office, that she's dangerous, that she is, because she's unwilling to do things, you know, actually work for the American people, that people are dying on her watch. So now if we go down this road, this is the dangerous precedent. You can't make a claim against any of these politicians. And by the way, that's what they want. They want to set this precedent so that no one can criticize any of our political leaders, especially Democrats. Because once you accuse them of being something, you know, corrupt, crooked, bought off, killing people with their policies, right? Any of those things, you are now responsible for inciting violence against them. And that is why, even if you hate Donald Trump, even if you believe that the guy is a big orange buffoon and he's a shame on this country and he never should have sat in the Oval Office and you hate his guts, you cannot hate our democracy more than you can't hate Trump so much that you're willing to sacrifice our democracy. You just can't, because this is what it's going to do. There are going to be bought off politicians that you believe their policies and their ideas are killing Americans. You can believe that about the NRA bought off Republicans. right? You do think that. Many of you think those Republican senators and congresspeople who are bought off by the NRA are allowing children to die. You believe that. So then are you now going to be silenced from saying anything against them because somebody decides to take matters into their own hands? Somebody deranged or somebody very angry, and they just literally get up in arms and they say, hey, I'm going to give you a taste of your own medicine. That would be very, very that's a dangerous precedent for us to set, and we just cannot do it. So this is the third point they're saying about Trump's impeachment sham trial, ridiculous trial. Like, why are we doing this? It says Michigan is a test run. So here we go. It says here, on April 30th, 2020, a crowd of Trump supporters crowded into the Michigan state capitol to protest Governor Gretchen Whitmer's state of emergency order to deal with the spread of the coronavirus pandemic. Remember, she was Cruella de Vil and had the harshest lockdowns in the entire country. You couldn't go into a Home Depot. You could go into a Home Depot, but you couldn't go into a Home Depot and buy paint. You couldn't go into a Home Depot and buy gardening seeds because that wasn't considered essential. You could go into Home Depot only to buy essential items, what Governor Whitmer decided was essential, and anything non-essential was roped off. You weren't allowed to buy it. It was ridiculous. You couldn't even travel to your second home in the state of Michigan. If you owned a second property, you couldn't go. You were banned from going to your own house. This is, she was the worst when it comes. I mean, Governor Newsom is definitely trying to give her a run for her money on the crown for who's the worst governor during the pandemic, but Gretchen Whitmer certainly was. So they said that it said that the crowd, the Trump supporters that crowded the Michigan state capitol against Gretchen Whitmer, that came less than 2 weeks after Trump had tweeted, "Liberate Michigan." So now he's responsible for what happened in Michigan, the kidnapping plot. They say because he said, "Liberate Michigan." So suddenly, those are fighting words, guys. Says this is a huge win. The organizer of the Michigan protest told CNN at the time. Then in early October, 13 men were arrested for an act of domestic terrorism, a plot to kidnap Whitmer. Michigan was a preview of the coming insurrection, said Raskin today. The connection between the events in Michigan and those at the Capitol on January 6th and Trump's initial response to both were used by the impeachment managers to suggest that Trump had not only primed the pump for what happened on January 6th, but that he and his supporters had already conducted what amounted to a dry run of what we saw play out at the Capitol on January 6th. As Raskin put it, January 6th was a culmination of Trump tactics, not an aberration from them. So, of course, they didn't think about that at the time. But today they decided that, oh, yes, the Michigan plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer was actually a dry run of the insurrection on January 6th. So, of course, this was planned. This wasn't just something that happened, a protest that got out of hand like all the protests that happened over the summer. No, there wasn't. That's not what this was. This was plotted and planned. And look at Michigan in order to figure this out. It was all, now you see. So it says right here, disrespecting the police. They said that, that all these people that claim that they love, Blue Lives Matter, do they really, it says here, do they really actually love the police as much as they insist they do when they're shouting in their faces and saying that they were on the wrong side? Do they really love their police? Do they really, these people are not who they say they are, is what this argument was. I don't know how that had anything to do with Donald Trump inciting an insurrection. Whether or not those people are hypocritical, like many people are, or not, doesn't seem to have any bearing on whether or not Trump is responsible for the insurrection. It says right here, GOP senators are losing interest. Also, they said another takeaway from the impeachment trial, the final Democrat House managers argument today was the last day. So they said the final thing was the senators are losing interest, that many of them just didn't show up. Apparently, there was a lot of empty seats. So it says right here, like, oh, how dare they? They've already made up their minds. Well, yes, they've already made up their minds. I've already made up my mind. You have to show me that Trump did something in order to incite the insurrection. You can't just say, well, these people like Trump and they did this thing to the Capitol, and so therefore it's his fault because they like Trump and they were doing it because they like him so much. They like him so much that they wanted him to continue to be president of the United States, and he kept saying he thought it was a sham, and they believed him, and they did this thing because they loved him so much. That doesn't mean he plotted, planned in a Charles Manson way and, made the details, told them how to do it, what to do, gave them the blueprints and said, go for it. That's not what happened. And that's what would needed to have been proven in order for them to say he incited this insurrection. And we must, as the American people, doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on, we must, as the American people, demand that that is the bar that they have to, that's the threshold. They have to say, you have to prove it without a shadow of a doubt that he actually incited this insurrection, that he himself plotted and planned it or directed somebody on his team to plot it and plan it, that there were some marching orders directly coming from him to do this. And if we don't set that as the standard, then again, if you criticize Nancy Pelosi or you criticize Mitch McConnell for being bought off by the NRA and his policies are killing people, or Nancy Pelosi's policies are killing people, or the Democrats in their not willingness, their unwillingness to implement Medicare for all, whatever it is that you think is killing people, if you say that out loud and you point the finger at a person in Congress, then you are potentially held liable if somebody goes and does something and says, you're right, we must remove them from office. We cannot have these people there. And we got to think about the rhetoric of the Democratic Party for these last 4 years. They were saying that these people were white supremacists, that we were being taken over by Nazis and white supremacists, and that this was an existential dire crisis. I mean, even Bernie Sanders, who would go out there, this is the most dangerous man, the most dangerous time. Even Bernie Sanders got wrapped up in that crap. And the reality is that was Trump, they're all dangerous. Trump is no more dangerous than the rest of them. The difference was they couldn't control Trump. And that to the establishment made him more dangerous because they didn't know what he was going to do when he was going to do it. So that was an interesting, takeaway from an interesting sort of, takeaway from the what was going on here. Let me see. I had another. Rand Paul, he was actually interviewed and he made a really good case. He was interviewed on on Fox and he made a really good case about the fact that, he listened to the 3 days and said they didn't make their case. And the Democrats kept saying, because they couldn't point to any words actually that Trump said specifically when the Republican senators were saying, show us where he said that this is, show us where he says, go and do this thing. And they said, well, okay, we don't have those words. We don't have those words, right? So the Democrats couldn't show any proof of these words. So then it's like, okay, then what are we doing here? I thought that you said, and this was the claim, the reason to impeach him was because he incited this insurrection. So you have to prove that. And then they say, well, no, it was that he was calling the election into question. And that's what it was. So it wasn't actual words he said to direct people to go do this horrific thing. It was instead his conspiracy theory claims that the election was rigged, or that the election was Freudian slip, that the election was stolen. So that's what they're saying. Okay, so. Now, guys, what that means, if that's the case, is that you're not allowed to question our government or question whether or not we still live in a democracy. And look, Jamie Raskin gave a really good argument to this the other day. I think it was on the first day on Tuesday. He said our democracy is reliant on the faith of people, that the people believe that we still have a good democracy, a clean democracy, that we're still operating in this way. And when people lose faith in that, then it creates this, it's terrible for the future of our country. And so we can't question these things because it's fragile and our democracy relies on the people believing in it. Okay. And so he says, so the danger was that the U.S. president was saying, no way, this is a fraud. And so if the U.S. president is sitting there telling you, it's not that great, then of course people are going to believe the U.S. president. So I thought that was a good argument, but it's only a good argument if you believe that our democracy is uncorruptible. And I don't believe that. I don't believe that there's any empire in existence today that existed 1,000 years ago. There just isn't. Every empire falls, and they usually fall because they become corrupted. Every empire in the history, if you've ever read a history book, you know that every empire at some point rises and falls. And the reason it usually falls is because it's corrupted and the people rise up against it. And so I would agree with him if I believed that our democracy was solid and uncorruptible and everything was, wonderful and great. But if that were the case, then it wouldn't be so easy to persuade people into believing that that democracy is hanging, that it's as fragile as it is. You couldn't look if we believed that, yes, it's all good, then we wouldn't have had any of this happen. But the fact is that we all know it's bought off. We all know our government's bought off, and it's been bought off for a really long time. And so since we know it's been bought off for a really long time, since we know that our politicians are corrupted and crooked and that they have been for decades, my entire life, then and it's only gotten worse, and we know this, then of course the next step is to start calling into question really everything. I mean, we've been lied to. We know now, everybody in America now knows we were lied to about going to war in Iraq. We know that we were lied to on that. We know that there's such thing as gerrymandering. We know that there's voter suppression. This is something Democrats have been talking about for a long time. We know that there's that our politicians have been bought off by big money. We know these things. So if we know that we have a government on the take, it is not a stretch, it's not a stretch to then just say how much of this is corrupted, actually. If they could corrupt this much, could they corrupt this much? And if they could corrupt this much, can they corrupt this much? Right? We don't know. But it's a question that people ask because we know that there is some corruption in our government. So if they really want to stop this conspiracy theory from spreading, then they need to get their act together and stop being so corruptible. That's what needs to happen, is that our politicians have to stop being so crooked. And if they weren't crooked, then more people would start to have faith and trust in our democracy again and would say, you know what, now we see you're good, you're virtuous, you're actually working on behalf of the American people and not your big money donors. And so from there, we believe that, yeah, you're right. You wouldn't rig something just for gaining power. You wouldn't gerrymander or take big money and ignore your constituents. All of these things. But that's the issue. So when they say, well, all of this was just a conspiracy theory and that people are believing that nearly half of America is believing this conspiracy theory. And then they say they're all Trump supporters, which is not true because there's a huge wing of the Bernie supporting Democrats who believe that the elections are not quite so on the up and up. A huge number of Democrats who hate Donald Trump, who also believe things are not on the up and up. Plus, we see what we as a country do around the world, right? We see what the American government does around the world. We know that we corrupt we meddle in everybody else's elections. So it's not actually a stretch of the imagination. It's not actually a leap for people. So to think, oh, these are just QAnon conspiracy theorists. Half of America, they're just like sitting in their mom's basement on 8chan, like listening to these conspiracy theories. No, it's believable. And that's why they're going so hard against it. And that is why they're going to attempt any way, shape, or form to silence all of us from ever speaking up against them. And this now, they're setting a new precedent. You're not allowed to point the finger at anyone in Congress and claim anything negative about them. Certainly nothing that crosses the line, like that they're corrupt, that they must be removed, or that they're killing Americans because of their policies or whatever it might be, or that they're or questioning the integrity of our elections. Anything that you're not allowed anymore to have any of those questions, and they're going to make damn well sure of it.